We check in on the Nashville Predators with a look back to last season, an offseason that included a big change in the front office, and we'll take a look ahead to the upcoming season as well. All that and more on this edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs. But obviously, we are in the offseason, and we are reviewing all 32 NHL teams to get you ready for the upcoming season. I'm Eddie Garcia, and when I'm not hosting Locked On NHL Game Night, I am the host of Locked On LA Kings.
And I'm Shukri Wrights. When I am not co-host of Locked On NHL Game Night, I am the co-host of Locked On MLB Game Night and host and producer for 97.5 The Fanatic Philadelphia. And together we're bringing you the latest news, storylines from across the National Hockey League as we continue to preview and review all 32 teams across the NHL. And today we are going down south to Nashville, Tennessee for some good old Nashville barbecue and the Nashville Predators.
All right, and to help us do that, we're happy to welcome in the host of Locked On Nashville Predators. His name is Jack Williams. Hey, Jack, thanks for joining us today.
What's up, Jack?
Glad to be here.
Good to have you. Lots of interesting things to get into with the Nashville Predators. But before we look ahead, look to the offseason and what things have changed, and of course, look ahead to next season, we do want to take a look back to last season for the Predators, where they had a record of 38, 34, and 10. 86 points. That was sixth in the Central. They finished 4 points out of a wild card spot in the West. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume going into last season that this was a team that was looked at as a team that could get a playoff spot, probably a wild card. And if you didn't make it, you probably would you'd be in contention, but fall a little bit short. That's what happened. So when you look back at last season, was it what you expected for the most part?
It was really a roller coaster. I know that's such a cliche, but to sum it all up, it really was. This team started off as the worst team in the NHL in October. They had a dreadful start to the year, and that's seemingly been the theme for the last few years here in Nashville. Then they picked it up in November and December and suddenly flipped the script completely, making a push towards the playoffs. You saw guys like Steven Stamkos getting going again. You know, Filip Forsberg really upping his production. Roman Josi putting in minutes that are just beyond of what it's expected at his age, especially with his injury history. And they gave themselves a chance towards the end of the year. I don't think a lot of people even expected them to sniff towards playoff, especially what had happened the previous season, where you had all this hype built up with Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea coming in, and all of it falling flat right there. Coming into this year, I think the fans just wanted something better. Didn't look like that originally, but really made it contentious towards the end. In those final weeks, it looks like Nashville was going to make it in. Eddie, you know a lot about this race and what it came down to between Nashville and LA. LA ended up having that extra step there, but I mean, the expectations are up now with this team, especially with the change in the front office here, and that after getting so close, the expectation is this team should be competing and sliding into one of those wild card spots in this upcoming season.
When you think about the season that just passed, I think one of the things that stood out to me was that you had some pretty impressive young kids who really began to make waves for themselves. I'm talking about Luke Evangelista. One name comes to mind. Matthew Wood is another one. And for me, Cole O'Hara. The kids are all right in Nashville, aren't they, Jack?
Yeah, it's a great prospect pool that they have going here right now. It's a lot of what, Barry Trotz gets a lot of flack, but I mean, what he's done over the past few years and building up that prospect pool has been so good for Nashville. And you have some really great pieces that are settling up right now. Guys that are really lighting up in college with Riker Lee. You have Cameron Breed headed over to Michigan coming up here this next season. Jack Ivankovic, who helped Michigan get as far as they did into the Frozen Four. And then this year, as you mentioned with Nashville, Luke Evangelista, after, the contract negotiations that were happening still a year ago at this point, where he signed really late into training camp and they eventually got it back here. And he really just proved his worth and just really clicking with a lot of superstars on this roster. Filip Forsberg, Steven Stamkos, playing with those guys and upping his total to have the highest assist total on the team. Matthew Wood has been fantastic this year in jetting out, putting up 30 points in his rookie season, getting a hat trick in November. Again, just blowing expectations out of the water. And as you mentioned, Cole O'Hara towards the end of the year, I think it was right at the time when the Predators kind of knew that they were out of it. They said, let's give these young guys a chance. And Cole O'Hara was one guy that really earned that opportunity. I believe he registered his first NHL point in that final game of the season. Aiden Fink had the opportunity to get up as well, had a great year with Penn State, had the opportunity to play his final game of the regular season in Nashville, would be his first NHL game. Unfortunately, there was some visa issues from Canada to the United States, and he ended up having to sit that out. But Aiden Fink's going to be a great piece coming in as well. But yeah, the prospect pool is great here in Nashville. There's a lot to look forward to, and it's really motivating for the fans.
Steven Stamkos obviously did not have a great first season in Nashville. Really bounced back strong a season ago. Looked very good down the stretch. Kind of the old Stamkos was there. He's a year older going forward, so kind of a question looking back and looking ahead. What is I assume that there was some level of relief in that we did see some of the old Steven Stamkos last season. How do you feel about him going forward now?
Yeah, the big thing was that he took a different mentality and approach to his game that we had been seeing opposite from what we had been seeing his entire career in the NHL. This guy is going to be a future Hall of Famer, expecting goals and stuff like that and flashiness. And I think a lot of that pressure and what he had been doing for so long in the first month of the season, what he was going along more, flashy goals, scoring high on the highlight reel, high offensive opportunities, but realizing in a different team and probably in the place that he's in his career right now. And he talked about this. He had to change his approach of offense and how he was scoring. And we saw it more of, going to the net, getting off goals off of second chances, rebounds, those dirty goals in front of the net, finding the puck and putting it in. He was really dominating that space in front of the goalies, and that allowed his production to jump even more. So it's kind of like a Steven Stamkos 2.0 to say the least. I mean, it's a different version of what he has been used to playing or what we've been seeing from Steven Stamkos over his entire career. But that offensive mentality, that drive and that leadership is still here, and he is still an ace on the power play. I mean, really found that touch with that one-timer on the power play later in the season with the Predators. But I mean, he kind of adjusted a little bit more, and going forward, obviously this is a guy that's a little bit older, guy with a ton of talent and upside. With this new approach he has coming to his game, I think it's bought him a few more years, maybe 2 or 3 more years before we really see him kind of entering that retirement mode, or seeing him talk about that decision a little bit more. But as of what we've seen from Steven Stamkos, as you mentioned, picking his play up a little bit more towards the second half of the season, he's locked in, and I don't see any reason why he would dwindle off right now. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And he seemed to really fix himself at the beginning of the year and really oil those gears and get going.
I can be a little critical when it comes to goaltending in AHL. I'm probably a little biased, but when I watched Predators games last season, I felt like Juuse Saros, who took over in net, after Pekka Rinne retired, I expected a lot more from him in 2024, 2025. He had an okay season, but not great. This past season, 2025-26, it was more of the same, even though he did have more wins in net than he did in the previous season. So when you assess the play of Juuse Saros and your overall expectations, has he met your expectations in Nashville along with the expectation of fans, considering that Juuse Saros is the number one guy in Nashville?
Yeah, I think the big thing with Juuse Saros and, talking about his play and his production is, the defense in front of him is awful. That's the big thing. The defensive unit has been just dreadful this past season. And going into this next season, that's one of the biggest concerns, is that I think there was one change made on the back end. So there wasn't a lot of help with what's going forward with the defense. What that has to do with Juuse Saros was that he was not getting a lot of support from the guys in front of him. And if you look at his save totals and the shots that he saw at one point, I think in the earlier part of the year when Nashville was one of the worst teams in the league, his save totals were off the roof. The shots he was seeing were off the roof, and it was because the defensive in front of him wasn't helping, and he was doing a lot to keep Nashville afloat in the beginning of the year. And I think from what your point you made was that I think he just needs a better defense to really supplement his play a little bit more fully and all around. He did a lot of work this season trying to carry the Predators, keep them in games. A lot of their losses at the beginning of the year were 1-goal losses, so he kept them close, and it could have been a lot worse. But he's a guy that's still playing very well. I think it's just the team in front of him just needs to improve. He's still an ace. He's still the best finished goaltender in this league right now, as we saw being selected into the Olympics. So, I mean, he's very, very good. He's going to have a little bit more pressure on him with Juuse Saros igniting his game, having the chance to play the World Championships and representing Finland there and playing well towards the end of the year. The Predators chose Juuse Saros as the starter in those games that were really critical towards the end. He got the Predators' only shutout of the season, which I believe was a 5-0 win over Anaheim. So, I mean, it's turning into a 1A, 1B situation right now. But as for Juuse Saros, as of now, he's still the starter in this organization. And I think if the Predators can improve in front of him, we're really going to see his stats round out a little bit more and kind of maybe jump out off the sheet a little bit more when we're talking about the league conversation when it comes to goalies.
All right, up next, we will get into this offseason for the Nashville Predators, including a new general manager. That is next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Locked On NHL Game Night is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick on who you think will hit a home run in their game. And if you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep, and now you can get a chance to make your prediction before the first pitch. Sometimes it's a hitter who's on a hot streak. Maybe it's a favorable pitching matchup or even a ballpark that gives up a lot of home runs. Those are the first things I look for before making my daily dingers pick. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who is hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences with FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we are back talking about the Nashville Predators, and we will focus and shift a little bit more into the offseason for them. Jack Williams is with us, the host of Locked On Nashville Predators. Jack, as you well know, GM Barry Trotz last year had announced that he was going to step down early in the season. The Preds seem to be taking their time in finally getting a replacement for him, but in the end, I think they probably got the man that they were targeting, and that was Avalanche general manager Chris McFarland. Thoughts on McFarland as the new Preds GM and thoughts on taking him away from a division rival?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing was I didn't think the Predators were going to be able to pick him up. I said it on the Predators podcast here of just that I thought it was too good to be true. The rumors were going around that McFarland was in the conversation, and I was kind of like, why in the world would a President's Trophy winning GM who has had a team with so much success want to leave for Nashville, a team that frankly didn't have too much going on? And I was wowed by it. I was really impressed. And I think it's just because he gets to oversee a lot more as GM and director of hockey operations as well. But I think it was a great hire, and just bringing in, the big thing was bringing in somebody that wasn't linked to this organization in any sort of context. You know, you had Dave Poile, excuse me. Before that, the first GM of the Predators, who was here for an extremely long time. And then you have Barry Trotz coming in right after him, who was the first coach of this team. And it felt like the Predators were just on this kick of, sticking with the good old boys club and hiring a lot of guys that were friends with the organization. And it was great to see them get somebody who was outside that had proven success in this league. We'd seen what Chris McFarland had done at Colorado, putting that team together, extending their success from their 2022 Stanley Cup run, and just being a threat in the league. We all know just how good Colorado was at the beginning of the year, and he's been very good here in Nashville, and just I think letting a lot of emotions go when it comes comes to bringing in guys and drafting guys and whatnot, and getting away from what has been kind of a Nashville mentality of drafting and trading for a specific kind of player, and just looking at what's going to make this team successful. And the moves he's made so far in the offseason have been great in bringing in not just star players. I think a lot of outlets have been talking about how Nashville doesn't have a true superstar player, and that's going to hamper their success. But a big thing that Chris McFarland has done is he's brought a lot of depth pieces in, and that's what Nashville needs. And what he's done so far is he's filled up those 4 lines on the offense and added the depth that they need specifically down the middle. And it just makes them look more good, more complete. And the moves he's made so far have been pretty fantastic.
Speaking of moves, when I look at general managers, they go into a new organization, especially in the NHL, they have a philosophy. And what I've noticed in terms of the moves that they made, they brought 2 of the former players that he had in Colorado, and Ross Colton, and as well as Jack Drury as well. And they also made the trades for Maverik Bourque, Adam Edstrom, and as well as Nils Hoglander. When you see the moves that McFarland has made, what does that tell you about the philosophy that he's bringing to Nashville that he also had in Colorado, which gave them the success that they had as well?
Yeah, I think he just thinks that Nashville is still a competitor, is a team that can compete for a playoff spot, and dare I say it, a Stanley Cup. Just a team that can get into the playoffs and want to compete and want to build upon that. One of the things that he talked about in his first availability to media was that he posed a question to the hiring committee and saying, what is the definition of this team? Do you want to be a team that goes into a full rebuild, or do you want to be one that's a competitor and competing? And it was right away that they answered that we want to be a competitor. We still want to compete, instead of tearing everything down and rebuilding from the ground up and trying to land, the number 1 overall pick and all that kind of stuff. It was about building upon what's already there and finding pieces in the league that were going to give something that Nashville was missing, which was depth. They have a lot of stars up front, and then there was kind of a fall off when we're talking about the rest of the lineup. And we saw that from additions like Drury and Colton specifically, who, as you mentioned, they carried over from Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
But, McFarland talked them up a lot, and how much Jack Drury is not going to be just a great piece that is going to amplify, the depth from the middle 6, but is going to be a great locker room piece. And as you mentioned earlier about bringing in these young guys and bringing in a younger core, and he's going to help a lot with, building that future up and looking further ahead. Ross Colton, a similar guy that's kind of a Swiss Army knife, to say the least, of a guy that can do everything. And then you have some talent along the wings when we're talking about guys like Alex Kerfoot and Nils Hoglander, who are 2 guys that are looking to kind of have a little bit of a redemption arc, have proven in the past that they can be good, middle 6, bottom 6 players, and have a chance to redeem themselves here. And of course, Maverik Bourque, who they have a lot of expectations for. They gave him a good contract. They want him competing for that 1C spot. I believe he's going to play a big role in the top 6 for the first time in his career. If you look at his numbers, he's progressed fantastic since he entered the NHL and the AHL. When we're talking about just professional leagues in general. So it's just a vision of, he got the answer that he asked of Nashville wants to be competitor. All right. From what I learned in Colorado, I'm going to build this up as a team that is deep. And, as we know how to win a Stanley Cup, especially from Carolina, there can be all stars on your team, but the key to lifting that trophy at the end of the season is going to be depth all around.
Yeah. When you look at the Predators roster, you've got veteran guys that are locked in there for a while. Stamkos, Marchessault, Forsberg, Juuse Saros, all signed beyond this season, and they all have no movement clauses in their contract. So I guess it's almost forced his hand a little bit, right? In that you want to retool, but you have this core that's kind of locked in there. So you're trying to make improvements, but there's still that core that's going to be there. It looks like for this year and at least next year as well. So I wonder if that's kind of forced his hand on what he is able to do with the team.
Yeah, and I think part of that is interesting, and just I think there is so much, emotional, attachment when it comes to players and coaches. When Barry Trotz was here, I think a good example of that was Fedor Svechkov, and what we saw from him last year was it seemed like his production and what they wanted to see from him as a younger center is that they wanted him to get going immediately, and they kept forcing it. And the big question just became the big thing that just came from the fans and media was that, this guy needs to be in Milwaukee. He needs to develop there, but the Predators, and, I think a lot of it was, on the GM of just forcing it and trying to get this guy to develop. Eventually they did send him down to Milwaukee. He came back up. just didn't get going the way that the Predators wanted to. When McFarland came in, he immediately said, all right, if you're not helping or a part of this, you're out of the picture, and then sent him over to Colorado along with Zach LaRue. So, I mean, he's not afraid of, if something's not working, he's not afraid of getting rid of it. Unlike I think the past, leadership and ownership was like. I think, especially with Ryan O'Reilly's a big name that's going to be talked about this season, and getting him an extension and getting him re-signed, is that, if he's going to be a major part of leading in the youth in this locker room and all that. But I mean, if he's not producing the way that the Predators are expecting out of him, once his contract comes up or once the trade deadline rolls around, I don't think Chris McFarland would be afraid at all of trading him. The big conversation right now in the offseason too is about Jonathan Marchessault, and that if his production doesn't up in any sort of way, the conversations are going to start up with, okay, well, where are you going to produce elsewhere? And I mean, the big thing with these veterans in place is that, they play an important role in Nashville. And as you mentioned too, kind of force his hand to work around it. But at the same time, if they're not going to work towards his vision, he has shown already that he's not afraid to get rid of anybody in order to make this team successful.
Defense last season for the Predators was no secret how much they struggled. They were 26 in the NHL in goals against per game, a 3.26. And you talk about the top 6 defensemen that were there last season. They're all back this year. Josi, Perbix, Shea, Barron, Haig, and Wilsby, not to forget about Lyubushkin, who was acquired from the Stars in the July 1st trade. So how do you see the Predators improving defensively? And also, do you think that they would, stick with the current crop of guys that they currently have, or give the younger players a chance to earn playing time in Nashville?
Oh, that's a good question, because the defense is just so awful.
It was bad.
It was real. It's truly bad, and it's rough when you have a player like Roman Josi, who has played all 1,000 of his career games in Nashville, and he is the age that he is, and his mid-30s, having the injury history that he does, has that, had the POTS diagnosis in the offseason, was able to come back in time of training camp and dealt with some injuries here and there, but he was their best defenseman, and he was really pulling and tugging them along. Nick Blankenburg, who was their second best defenseman, went over to Colorado during the trade deadline. I don't think he's been signed to a new contract here. You had Ryan Ufko thankfully step up in that part, but you just had a defense that either was just slow to pucks or just didn't know what was going on. And I think the big thing with getting better with that is this combination that Andrew Brunette has in mind of just having a traditionally minded defenseman who's going to play straightforward and what you expect from a defenseman that's going to stay back, hit hard, going to create breakouts, and, play a little bit further back, have that paired up with, a new modern, offensively minded defenseman, as we're seeing from guys like, older, but Roman Josi, who's going to go below the blue line and force offense a little bit more, as we saw from Ryan Ufko, kind of the Cale Makar model of defenseman, as we're talking about. And, McFarland talked about this when we're talking about free agency, of he wanted to go out into the market and land those kind of guys, guys like Cale Makar that are going to amplify the offense, that are going to have the confidence to go deep and try to score. And just those guys weren't available in the market. So, I mean, he's looking completely. I think the fact that nothing changed on the back end was just because nothing was available at the moment. So, I mean, I think it's, kind of dealing with the hand he's dealt right now, and just, okay, how are we going to get this to work early on? You have someone like Ilya Lyubushkin, who I think can add a little bit more stability, and, possibly guys like Brady Shea, have him gain a little bit more confidence to push the puck a little bit more forward. Don't ask me about the Justin Barron signing. I don't know why they did that. But when we're talking about the defense, I think it's just trying to get this combination to work of, kind of a yin and yang of sorts. And that doesn't work, I think, McFarland's going to start chopping and see, how can we get these guys that fit the modern model of, being a good NHL defenseman, being an elite NHL defenseman. How can we go out and land these guys in Nashville? Because, guys like Haig, guys like Perbix, Wilsby's still young, but, guys like this, like, they need to step it up. Haig was brought over from Vegas, and Barry Trotz preached about how he's going to play, he's going to play top pairing minutes. And he hasn't done anything outside of what he did in Vegas. And he was, the last pairing defenseman down there. So, you have a lot of guys that need to step it up. And, going along this theme of the new GM, if they're not going to do anything, there's nothing for him to, say, like, defend for him on all this and such. He will go out into the market, I believe, and find somebody else.
All right, up next, we will look ahead to this coming season for the Predators, find out what would be a successful season for them. Do that next year on Locked On NHL Game Night. All right, we're wrapping it up with Jack Williams. He is the host of Locked On Nashville Predators. Jack, I'm going to throw up for the people that are watching. That I probably could have said that better. I'm going to put up on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube what the projected lineup for the Nashville Predators could be on opening night, and get your reaction to that. Any names that you feel like there could be competition for their spot, or if you would have them in a different place. This comes from the folks over there at Puckpedia. They have a top line of O'Reilly, Evangelista, and Stamkos, a second line of Bourque, Forsberg, and Marchessault, third line of Drury, Colton, and Wood, and a fourth line of Pinchuk, Hoglander, and Kerfoot. The defensive pairings, they have Shea and Josi, Perbix and Haig, and Wilsby and Labushkin, with the goalie tandem of Saros and Anunen. How does that look to you? Does that look about right, or would there be something you think could be different?
Oh man. I mean, the defense, I do not understand why they keep leaving Ryan Ufko off these projections. It drives me crazy. This is somebody who is, he's a little bit undersized, of course, and he's smaller, but he can move the puck. He had one of the best goals, according to the NHL, this entire season. He's, I was amplifying and preaching him a ton this year because he was down in Milwaukee for a very long time. And the only reason he came up was because they needed a defenseman. Barry Trotz traded a bunch of guys. They needed somebody to come up, and he was an AHL All-Star. And I just don't understand why he's continuously left off this roster. He is their second best defenseman, in my opinion. And I don't understand why he's out of the mix here. I think that's the big thing I want to harp on with that. And then the other thing I saw is just the decisions of where to play guys like, Colton, Drury, and Pinchuk. Pinchuk, I feel like, should be a little bit higher in the lineup. This is a guy that they were battling for when we're talking about KHL contracts and KHL free agents, and they won over the Flyers. I feel like you'd want to amplify that a little bit more and possibly move him up further up the lineup. Try it out in the beginning. If it doesn't work, you can throw him down to the fourth line or what so not. And then with Colton, I think Ross Colton would be better utilized on the fourth line, centering a little bit more. He's had success playing on the wing, but I think the Predators need that depth down the middle. I think he can provide that. Jack Drury, I like his place in the third line as well, but a lot of that looks about right. It's just, I am the biggest Ryan Ufko truther out there. I do not understand why this guy gets left off everything. It drives me crazy.
Well, I didn't see him play a lot as far as game, and highlights can be, misconstrued, maybe his overall game, but the highlights jump out at you when you see the way he can handle the puck and make things happen offensively. He certainly is somebody that I remembered immediately. The last name being unique helped as well, but I'm like, who is this guy? So there's no doubt. I can understand where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, I just don't get it. I mean, like you said, the highlights, he has only a certain amount of games he played towards the end of the year, but he was, I think, leading defenseman in points in the AHL at one point. And I'm screaming up here in Nashville being like, why in the world is he still down there when, as I've mentioned over and over again, just how bad the defense was here in Nashville. Why is this guy sitting in Milwaukee? It was just, and they're doing the same thing again now. It's just, I don't get it. I think I don't think that's going to fold out. I think we're going to see it in training camp. If all is right in the universe, he will be there opening night, but who knows?
Center depth has never been the strongest suit for the Predators. And you were just talking about the centers on this team, on getting, Ross Colton and Jack Drury from the Colorado Avalanche. They did get Alex Kerfoot as well and Maverik Bourque from the Dallas Stars. But the last two seasons has been Ryan O'Reilly. He's been the top line center for this team. So when opening night comes around at the end of next month, do you still foresee Ryan O'Reilly being the number one center for this team, or do you think there'll be a new top center for the Nashville Predators? Let's say, for example, a Maverik Bourque.
I still think Ryan O'Reilly is still the 1C on this team. I think the big thing that we've been hearing around the league a lot, especially towards November, Nashville wasn't playing very well. And Ryan O'Reilly was being, one thing about Ryan O'Reilly is he's going to be self-deprecating about his game no matter what. After games, he'd talk about how awful he played. And just, I think after one game where they were particularly bad, he said he only had one good year in the NHL. And I was like, geez, all right, man. But, he's still a guy that is debatably, in my opinion, the best guy behind the net on the team when we're talking about facilitating the puck and delivering the puck and setting up guys to score. He played such important minutes this year. He's so important in the locker room. I think he owns that 1C role, despite, and I just ran away from my other point about around the NHL, where a lot of guys and a lot of teams believe that he should be playing third line minutes and fourth line minutes. I mean, if he's giving the production that is, what is expected of a 1C role here in Nashville, I think that he's going to stay in that role up until, someone like Maverik Bourque will be able to chase him down later in the season. But opening night and through training camp, I think this is still going to be his role to own. I think he understands the wings around him. I think he has a good leadership sense of this team. He could be a guy that could wear a second C on this team as well. And I think he stays up there as the first line center until someone proves him otherwise. And, a lot of pressure is on Maverik Bourque to do that, be the next guy when we're talking about top line minutes.
Jack, I'll be really honest with you here, and very much from the outside looking in, I'm surprised Andrew Brunette is still the head coach of this team. And then with the new GM coming in, typically they like to bring in their own guys. I don't know who may have been available. Maybe he felt like Brunette was the best option, judging by coming in late, maybe. I don't know. I'm surprised he's still the head coach. Do you feel the same? Do you feel the same way? And how hot is the hot seat for Andrew Brunette?
Oh, I mean, how hot is a hot seat right now? Well, it's like 97 in Nashville right now. So, I mean, if you just put it outside in the sun, it's probably going to be that warm and even warmer right now. It's been so interesting, especially over the past year with Andrew Brunette. And the big reason why he was staying and why he was there was because Barry Trotz was his biggest supporter. Barry Trotz was his biggest cheerleader. He played for Barry Trotz during his time in Nashville very briefly. And then Trotz hired him on, when he was GM and taking over and such. And then he, as over and over again, we kept hearing him advocate for Andrew Brunette. He's saying, no, this is a young coach. He still deserves his chance. And, it came down to that global series game in the middle of November where, the Predators won in overtime in that first game against Sweden, in Sweden against the Penguins. And then the second game, they got blown out 5-0. The Predators had a week off in that stretch. And everybody, it felt like an agreed silent opinion that Andrew Brunette was going to be fired that week because they weren't turning anything around. And it seemed like just the perfect time to do it. And, nothing was really happening. The biggest thing that came out was Joakim Kamel was sent down to Milwaukee. So that didn't happen. But as you said, too, it was a surprise that he is still here. And I think the big thing is that is still keeping him here is that he had that turnaround in the middle of the year that got them almost into the playoffs. He kind of adapted the whole Ted Lasso believe mentality is what we saw over and over again from him. And just, he even talked about, he said, like, these guys must have thought I was crazy and saying the thing over and over again where we were losing all these games. And I kept saying, I like what our game looked like, but eventually it clicked and it did. And it proved, I think that point happening there and what he was able to do in turning things around there earned him at least one more month in Nashville. And I think when McFarland came in, he was like, all right, well, this guy turned it around towards the end of the season. Let's see how he starts out the year and go forth with that. So I think when we're talking about the first part of the year in October, and the Predators have been god awful through October over the last few years, the leash is a lot tighter now. And if he loses October, I recently did an episode with Ann Kimmel, and she talked about how, I think if they're around 500, they're going to be, he's going to be safe. And my opinion is that if they're on the losing side of 500, or even if they're at 500, and we saw it from the Kings too last year, from the Blue Jackets as well. Those teams were around 500, and they fired their coaches. I think it's going to be a similar thing happening here in Nashville. If Andrew Brunette is around that 500 mark or way below it, McFarland's going to cut that cord because, I mean, it's been too long at this point, and that will be, again, just the whole mentality of he's not afraid to do it. If he needs to do it, he will go do it.
Sure, you got a final question for Jack?
No, I'm all set.
I guess we'll leave it with this, Jack. Playoff team for the Nashville Predators next season. Where are you standing on that going into the year?
Oh, that's a good question. The Central is crazy.
Yep.
You know, you have Dallas, you have
Fact.
Colorado, you have Minnesota. So those 3 spots are going to be up there as well. And then you can have Utah and not knowing what they're going to do. Side note, I don't know what Utah is central of at all, but anyway. But then it comes down to, I think, what we were at last year, where you're going to have somebody pushing from the Pacific, possibly 2 or 3 teams. And then I think Nashville's going to be in that mix. I'm going to be bold and say that they can get over because they have the center depth here. I think they know that they need to get off to a better start this year. That's what hampered them and just haunted them for the rest of the year, was that awful, month and a half they had to the beginning of the season. And I think of just locking in a little bit more. I think with the depth that they have all around, hopefully the defense can click. I think this team can scoot into wild card 1 or wild card 2. I don't think they're in a place to compete for 1 through 3 in the Central, but I think they have a chance to really slide into that wild card 1 or wild card 2 spot.
All right. If you want complete coverage of the Nashville Predators, you must download and watch the Locked On Nashville Predators podcast and YouTube show with your host, Jack Williams. Jack, we appreciate this. Thanks for your time, and look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jack.
All right. And if you want complete coverage of all 32 teams in the NHL, whether it's getting you ready for the upcoming season or, of course, recapping the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs, you need to stick right here on Locked On NHL Game Night. That'll do it for this show. For my partner, Shukri, Wrights, I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time with another edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.